My name is Secret, and I'm a 32-year-old freelance illustrator who craves solitude like others crave company. After months hunched over my sketchbook in a cramped London flat, I decided I needed a break, somewhere quiet, remote, where I could breathe fresh air and let my pencil dance across the page uninterrupted. I booked a room at the Raven's Nest, a small inn tucked away in the misty hills of Dartmoor, southwest England, known for its rugged moorlands and whispered tales of ghostly hounds. It seemed the perfect place for inspiration. I pictured myself sketching windswept landscapes, sipping tea by a roaring fire, and letting the stillness soak into my bones. But what I found there wasn't peace. It was a terror that still claws at me in the dark. The drive to Dartmoor was a beast. The narrow road snaked through skeletal trees, their branches clawing at the sky, while a thick fog swallowed the world beyond my headlights. My old hatchback sputtered as I pushed it up the steep inclines, the windshield wipers slapping uselessly against the mist. By the time I pulled into the gravel lot of the Raven's Nest, it was past 9 at night, and my shoulders ached from gripping the wheel. The inn loomed ahead, a squat stone building with ivy creeping up its walls, its windows glowing faintly like eyes in the gloom. A wooden sign creaked in the wind, the raven carved into it, staring down at me with an unsettling tilt of its head. I grabbed my duffel bag and sketch pad, locking the car with a shaky hand. The air was damp and cold, carrying the earthy scent of moss and something faintly sour I couldn't place. Inside, the lobby was dim, lit by a single chandelier dripping with cobwebs. Behind the desk stood an older woman with sharp cheekbones and a tight bun of silver hair, Mrs. Tavish, the innkeeper. Her lips twitched into a thin smile as she handed me a brass key attached to a worn leather tag. "Room 7, second floor," she said, her voice clipped. "No pets, no smoking, and keep the noise down after 10. Breakfast at 8 sharp." I nodded, too tired to make small talk, and trudged up the creaky stairs. The hallway was narrow, wallpaper peeling at the edges, and the air felt heavy, like it hadn't been stirred in years. Room 7 was at the far end, its door slightly warped, the number etched into a rusty plaque. I turned the key, and the lock gave way with a groan. The room was small but cozy, a single bed with a quilted cover, a wooden dresser, and a chipped ceramic sink in the corner. A lone window overlooked the moor, though the fog pressed against it so thickly I couldn't see a thing. I dropped my bag, kicked off my boots, and sank onto the bed, exhaustion pulling at my eyelids. But sleep wouldn't come easy that night. Around midnight, I jolted awake, my heart pounding, like I'd been shaken from a bad dream I couldn't recall. The room was silent, save for the faint drip of the sink and the wind rattling the window pane. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and that's when I noticed it. The peephole on the door. It was standard for an old inn like this, but something about it felt off. I squinted, trying to make sense of the faint shadow behind it. Was it just the hallway light playing tricks? My stomach twisted as I swung my legs off the bed and shuffled closer, barefoot on the cold floorboards. Up close, the peephole looked wrong. A small piece of black tape covered it from the outside, its edges curling like it had been hastily slapped on. My breath caught in my throat. Why would someone tape it shut? I pressed my ear to the door, listening for any sound. A creak, a shuffle, anything. Nothing but the wind howling outside. Still, my hands trembled as I grabbed my phone and dialed the front desk, the line crackling before Mrs. Tavish's voice cut through. "What is it?" she snapped, clearly annoyed at being woken. "There's tape over my peephole," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "From the outside. Can you send someone to check?" A pause, then a sigh. "Stay put. I'll send Gideon up." I paced the room, clutching my phone like a lifeline, every creak of the old building spiking my pulse. 5 minutes later, heavy footsteps thudded up the stairs, and a knock rattled the door. "Miss Sigrid? It's Gideon, the handyman." His voice was gruff, laced with a thick Devon accent. I cracked the door open, peering out at a burly man in a faded flannel shirt, his beard streaked with gray. He held a flashlight in one hand and a toolbox in the other. His brow furrowed as he glanced at the peephole. "Tape, eh?" he muttered, peeling it off with a flick of his thumb. The black strip fluttered to the floor, revealing the tiny glass lens beneath. He shone his light into the hall, sweeping it left and right. Empty. Probably some kid's prank. But his eyes didn't meet mine when he said it, and I caught the twitch in his jaw. He didn't believe it was a prank any more than I did. "Lock your door tight," he added, turning to leave. "I'll check the grounds." I bolted the door behind him, my mind racing. A prank? In a place this isolated? The inn only had a handful of guests, an elderly couple I'd seen at check-in, and a quiet man with a briefcase who'd barely looked up from his newspaper in the lobby. None of them seemed the type to sneak around taping peepholes. I crawled back into bed, pulling the quilt over my head, but sleep felt like a distant memory. The next morning, I dragged myself downstairs for breakfast, bleary-eyed and jumpy. The dining room was sparse, just a few mismatched tables and a tray of scones under a glass dome. The elderly couple sat in the corner, whispering over their tea while Mrs. Tavish hovered near the kitchen door, her sharp gaze flicking to me as I poured coffee. I wanted to ask about the peephole, but something in her stiff posture told me I wouldn't get a straight answer. Halfway through my scone, the front door banged open, letting in a gust of frigid air. A man stumbled in, tall, wiry, with a patchy beard and a stained trench coat that hung off his frame like a scarecrow's rags. His eyes darted around the room before landing on me, and he grinned, showing yellow teeth. "Mornin', lass," he rasped, tipping an imaginary hat. Mrs. Tavish snapped at him to close the door, but he just shuffled to a table near mine, dropping a battered duffel bag that clinked like it was full of glass. I shifted uncomfortably, focusing on my plate, but I could feel his stare, like needles pricking my skin. When I risked a glance, he was still watching, his fingers drumming a frantic rhythm on the table. My stomach churned, and I excused myself, hurrying back to my room. The moment I reached the hallway, I heard it, a soft scrape, like boots dragging on wood, coming from behind me. I spun around, but the corridor was empty, the shadows pooling in the corners like ink. Back in room 7, I locked the door and wedged the dresser against it for good measure. My hands shook as I pulled out my sketch pad, trying to calm myself with quick strokes of charcoal. A jagged moorland hill, a raven perched on a twisted branch. But my mind kept drifting to that man downstairs, his grin, the way his eyes had latched onto me. Was he the one who taped the peephole? And why? That night, the terror hit full force. I just drifted into a restless sleep when a faint tapping jolted me awake. It was coming from the door, slow, deliberate, like fingernails clicking against wood. I sat up, clutching the quilt, my breath shallow and ragged. The tapping stopped, replaced by a low hum, a tuneless, guttural sound that sent ice down my spine. I crept to the door, my bare feet silent on the floor, and pressed my eye to the peephole. Nothing, just the dim hallway, the wallpaper curling at the seams. But then a shadow flickered, quick and jagged, like someone had darted past. My heart slammed against my ribs as I fumbled for my phone, dialing the front desk again. Mrs. Tavish answered with a groan. "What now?" "There's someone outside my door," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Tapping, humming. I saw a shadow." "Stay there," she barked. "Gideon's coming." I backed away from the door, my eyes locked on the peephole, waiting for that shadow to return. The minutes stretched into eternity, each creak of the inn amplifying my dread. Then a heavy thud, followed by a muffled shout from the hall. I froze, every muscle taut, as footsteps pounded closer. A sharp rap on the door made me jump. "Secret, it's Gideon. Open up." I shoved the dresser aside and yanked the door open. Gideon stood there, breathless, his flashlight trembling in his grip. Behind him, 2 police officers wrestled a figure to the ground. The man from breakfast, his trench coat flapping as he thrashed against their hold. His duffel bag lay spilled open, revealing a tangle of wires, a small camera, and a rusted knife that glinted under the hallway light. He was right outside, Gideon panted, wiping sweat from his brow. Had this gear. Been watching you through the wall, lass. My knees buckled, and I sank against the doorframe, bile rising in my throat. The police hauled him away, his wild laughter echoing down the stairs until it faded into silence. Gideon stayed with me while I packed, his gruff voice softening as he muttered apologies. Mrs. Tavish appeared, her face pale, claiming she'd had no idea he'd checked in under a false name. But I saw the flicker of guilt in her eyes. She knew more than she'd let on. Later, at the police station, I learned the truth. His name was Edgar Voss, a registered sex offender who'd been dodging parole for months. The camera in his bag had footage of me, grainy clips of me sleeping, sketching, unaware of the lens boring into my room from a hole he'd drilled in the wall. The knife, they said, was for if things escalated. I threw up in the station bathroom, the reality sinking in like a stone. I never returned to the Raven's Nest. I drove home that night, the moor's fog swallowing the inn in my rearview mirror. But it didn't feel like escape. Every shadow on the road, every creak in my flat carries his grin, his hum, the weight of his gaze. I don't sleep much anymore. When I do, I dream of that peephole and a pair of eyes staring back, unblinking, waiting.